Okay, so we're going to begin here our little journey through nutrition, most likely in 3 parts. We'll see how far we get in each part. But as we begin doing this, I want to make one point here fairly clear. I am not a nutritionist, and most importantly, I'm not your nutritionist. So when we go through here and we'll talk about recommendations for percentages of diets or recommendations for daily intakes and things like that, understand that you should not take those as gospel truth directly for you specifically. They're guidelines, and they're good guidelines to follow. But if you're worried about your own nutrition and nutritional plans and things like that, you really should go see a nutritionist or see your doctor, even your GP can help you out there, because they'll know more about your own personal physiology and get something set up from there. If you're not worried about it, then these serve as good guidelines. But again, don't make radical overhauling changes to your diet based on any of these things, because they may or may not directly apply specifically to you. Okay, with that disclaimer out of the way, what are we talking about when we're talking about nutrition? This is basically taking the broken down digested components from the chyme, right, from last chapter, bringing them into the body, transporting them around, and using them for some biochemical process in the body, all right? And so we're going to talk about the specific chemicals involved from digested food here as nutrients, okay? And we'll talk about varieties of different kinds of nutrients. And then also the question is, well, what are we using them for? Most of them end up going for what we call metabolic fuel. They are serving for processes that store energy in the body, okay? Primarily here, we think about the production of ATP, okay, as a stored energy source, but there are a handful of other ones that go into that. The remainder, so everything that doesn't go into energy storage, goes into things like structure, okay, so physically building new cells, building proteins, building you, right? Some physical kind of manifestation of a new object in some way. Really, those are our two primary options. We're going to measure the value in the nutrients that we've got in a number here called a kilocalorie or a kcal, or even just we'll just call them kcals. And the calorie and the kilocalorie are kind of arbitrarily defined. It's the amount of heat that you need to take 1 kilogram of water and raise the temperature by 1 degree centigrade. So again, it's kind of an arbitrary number, but it is standard across all of those things. Okay, so here the question is, well, what happens to the stuff? We've digested them, we've absorbed them from the chyme in the small intestine. What are we doing with them? Nutrients themselves, okay, these will be divided into major and other or minor nutrients, another way you can think about them. The major nutrients are one of 3 categories, and they form the vast majority of what it is that we actually bring into our bodies. So these would be carbohydrates, sugars, starches, things like that. Lipids, these are our fats, and of course, proteins. Vitamins and minerals fall under the other or the minor nutrient category. We need them. We need both vitamins and minerals, but not nearly in the same volume that we need carbs, lipids, and proteins. And technically, we do need water. So water does fall under the nutrient category, although it's, again, kind of an outlier relative to these things. Now, one thing that we do talk about, and we use the term essential nutrient here quite a bit, And in 2020, the term essential nutrient is somewhat problematic for us because essential is a term that we use in our daily life to mean something that you need, right? And so you would assume that anything that's not an essential nutrient would be something that you don't need, right? But here, we're using essential not in that sense. We're using essential in the sense of essence, right? Like your aunt on Facebook selling you essential oils, right? They're the essence of whatever else, you know, the pine mint or whatever, right? And so the term essential nutrient means it's something that we have to have in its own essence, okay? And the reason that we use this term is that most of the things that we bring into our bodies are in forms that may not be exactly what we need, right? We might bring in one kind of carbohydrate, but we need it in a different form, right? We bring in fructose, and we need glucose instead, right? Whatever. Your liver is a wonderful organ for many, many reasons, but one of the reasons that it's so very important for us is that your liver does the job of converting whatever we've brought in into something that we can or want, right? We can use or we want to use or whatever, if it's not exactly the right thing. But it is limited, right, in that it can't do that for everything. And so essential nutrients are ones that we can't make in our own body, and we have to bring in that form, in that exact form, right? Otherwise, we don't have it. Okay. That's all that means. It doesn't mean that it's not essential, you don't need it. It's simply something that you have to, you can't make on your own. Lots and lots of other things that don't fall into this essential category are essential, right? They're required, you need them, but you can make them from other things. All right, so let's look at, we'll start with our major nutrients here. We'll go through them one by one. We'll start with carbs because they're going to be the largest proportion of your diet on purpose, although, as we'll see, average American diet does tend to overinflate them. We typically get carbs from plants, right? We do get carbs from animals, right? There is glycogen, for example, in meat. If we eat dairy, there is a variety of different milk sugars that come out of that. Primarily, we think about lactose, but there are others. But most of the carbs that we bring in are from the fruit and veg aisle rather than from the butcher counter. And the big categories that we've got here, we think about starches and sugars, and really the difference between a starch and a sugar is how long the chain is, right? How many different little components are in the molecule. If they're simple, right, if there's one monomer or two monomers or whatever, we call these sugars, okay? And these are typically going to be from fruit. Right? We do get some from veg, okay? So sugar cane, sugar beets do make mono and disaccharides. Milk and honey are from the quasi-animal side of the thing, side of the aisle. And anything longer than that, right, falls into a bit of a starch here, which is where we get from grains and veg. A lot of the starches that we get come in the form of fiber, okay? And fiber is a structural carbohydrate in that it makes up the cell walls of the fruit or the vegetable in question. And some of these fibers we can digest. Okay, so we can talk about what we call soluble fiber. And soluble fiber is fiber that you can digest, you can break down in your body, you can turn into other things. This is primarily we call pectin, and pectin comes from apples. It's what makes an apple crisp and crunchy when you bite into it. We also find it in citrus fruits. This stuff is actually really good for you. It has been demonstrated to lower blood cholesterol levels, so it's a really positive thing. The fiber that we can't digest is called cellulose. And this is from basically stems and leaves. So when you eat vegetables, right, the cell walls of all of those vegetables contain cellulose. And this is insoluble fiber. You can't digest it. So there is no nutritive value in this fiber. You can't break it down. You can't digest it. It simply passes on its way through you. It's not to say that it's, again, not useful, okay? It does help with bowel movements, right? It provides what we call roughage. It helps move things along a little bit, but it provides no nutritive value to it. I'm not saying don't eat it, continue to eat it, but that stuff we can't do anything with. What do we use carbs for in your body? Primarily, we think about the simple sugar glucose as the primary fuel for metabolic processes, the manufacture of ATP, which we have talked about, and we'll talk about in some more detail later in the chapter. And most cells in your body are going to require glucose for the storage. Red blood cells, neurons, so your entire nervous system cannot use anything else. Okay, but you will find that some cells can actually also manufacture ATP out of fat. If we have a diet that is too rich in glucose, okay, either in the long term or in the short term, we're going to convert that into a different form for storage. Right? So we have a form called glycogen that is for short-term storage, and we can convert this back to fats for longer-term storage if needed. Other forms of sugars that we bring in, things like fructose and galactose, your liver turns these into glucose before we send them out in the round. As far as our, again, not a hard and fast rule here, but in general, right, we're looking at the average person here looking at somewhere around 100 grams a day of carbs in order to sort of maintain, right? That's not thriving, that's not doing well, that's not dying, right? Not starving. We would like to see people with a little bit more, okay, maybe 130 grams a day to really be successful at being alive, right? And ultimately somewhere around 50%, or maybe ideally a little bit more than 50% of your total caloric intake ought to be carbs. And we would prefer these to be complex carbohydrates simply because the foods that contain complex carbohydrates tend to be better for you than the ones that contain simple carbs. We think about here, Little Debbie's and things like that with sugar in them being simple carbohydrates. They've got other bad things in them too. So really ideally here, a lot of this would come in from veg more than fruit. If you run a major deficit, so under about 50 grams a day, your body starts to turn itself into fuel for ATP production. So proteins and fats, things that are structural in your body, get turned into energy. That way, again, that's real bad, right? That's not awesome. That's starvation level. Generally speaking, although it can be the idea of using fats for fuel is not necessarily a bad one. We don't like to see people using fats for fuel because of starvation, right? If your caloric requirement exceeds your caloric intake, that's great, okay? The problem with a decline in carbs below this level is that this really has a profoundly negative impact on brain activity, right? So if you're trying to burn fat, don't cut your carb intake this far, please. Just exercise, I guess is what that comes down to. Now, the average American diet, here we would see 46% carbs. And if we look at our numbers here, that falls in the low end of things, and you think, okay, well, that's not so bad. But here's the problem. Because of the way the income structure is sort of put together in this country now, the vast majority of people are poor, right? There's a very, very small amount of people that are extremely wealthy, and then a smaller chunk, a slightly larger chunk that are well off. and then not really a middle class anymore, and then a lot of people that are poor, honestly, is the way it is. People don't like to think of themselves as poor, but in the grand scheme of things, they tend to be. And this is where the quote-unquote obesity epidemic hits. It's not really in the upper classes or in the vanishing middle class, although it is there too. It's really in that lower income bin where the vast majority of Americans are. And the reason for that, okay, is that the things that are full of carbs are cheap, right? Rice, pasta, breads, full and full and full of carbs, and so the vast majority of their diet ends up being carbs, way over 65%, okay, because meat's expensive, right? And as a result, they have all of this extra sugar in their body that gets turned into fat, okay? On top of that, we look at the things that go into sort of the average makeup of the low-income diet, and they tend to be excessively sugary things, right? Things that are inexpensive, that are, maybe feel-good foods that's important for a person that's facing these sort of economic stresses every day, but they're really doing a number on their bodies. So that's really where a lot of this ends up coming from, this economic inequality that we're currently struggling with, going back to the early 80s. Fats, the second major nutrient here. We get these from a couple of different sources. We think about triglycerides or cholesterol, kind of being two different major forms of them. Triglycerides, sometimes we call these neutral fats, come from both meat products, so animal products, as well as plant products. Animal products typically tend to be what we call saturated fats, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later on in the chapter. And our plant fats tend to be what we call unsaturated fats. There is one exception to this. Your tropical oils or coconut oil and things like that also end up being saturated fats. Easiest way to tell them apart is that saturated fats at room temperature are solid. So if you think about the fat on your steak, or butter in your butter dish, or coconut oil in your jar, if that's your jam, they're solid, right? But olive oil, almond oil, most of your vegetable oils, right? Those are going to be liquid at room temperature. They come in a thing and you pour them out, right? Those are the unsaturated fats. That's the easiest way to tell them apart. In the middle here, we've got these things called trans fats or hydrogenated oils. We're just going to use the term trans fat because it's the one that's most commonly used. Trans fats are vegetable oils that have been turned into saturated fats. So that things like margarine, okay, that are solid at room temperature, but are derived from plant products. And these are a whole different category of terrible. These are really just horrible for you. And again, we'll talk about why that is in a minute. Cholesterol is essentially exclusively from animal products. So we get them from the yolks of eggs, we get them from eating meat, particularly organ meat. So if you eat liver or gizzard or kidney, all delicious organ meats, highly recommended. Tripa, if you eat tripe. Those tend to be rich in cholesterol. Shellfish tend to be rich in cholesterol, and milk products. The thing with cholesterol is that your liver, and we'll continue to kind of keep talking about this, your liver makes most of the cholesterol that you need. About 85% of the cholesterol that you need every day, your liver makes that of other forms. And that doesn't change depending on how much cholesterol you eat. If you eat no cholesterol, your liver makes 85% of what you need. If you eat a ton of cholesterol, your liver makes 85% of what you need. And so because of this unique kind of property here, it's very, very easy, right, to exceed your requirement for cholesterol. And your liver is really good, right, at doing that sort of thing, at making fatty acids, okay? But there are a handful of these essential fatty acids, right? And again, remember, what is an essential fatty acid, right? It's something that you have to eat, you can't make. So these would be things like linoleic and linolenic acids. Okay, and we get these from vegetable oils. They're easy to come across, they're easy to find, okay? But we still need to eat them. What are we using them for in your body? A couple of different things. Your skeletal muscles like to use fat for fuel. So again, we talked about the idea if you're trying to lose fat on your body, exercise rather than diet is honestly the best way to do it. If you work your skeletal muscles, they're going to use up these fats as fuel. Okay, it's a little bit harder than a diet, but it works much, much better. We use it to absorb fat-soluble vitamins. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Obviously, we use phospholipids in every cell membrane in your body, right? So we use lipids to produce those. We make fat as adipose tissue, right, for insulation. We cover our sensitive organs with it, so they're protected, all that kind of good stuff. We have a couple of hormones here, including one very important one, prostaglandins, is a lipid. And we use this for vasodilation and blood pressure control. And then in the form of cholesterol, we can use this both structurally, right? Cholesterol stabilizes cell membranes. We use cholesterol to make steroids. We use cholesterol to make bile salts for bile, okay? So we use a lot of different things for fats and not just simply there as fuel storage. Now, as far as requirements go, we do a really poor job of this as a nation. Again, this goes back to what is easy and cheap to buy, and those things tend to be heavily biased towards fats, okay? Particularly restaurant meals. And I'm a person who likes to eat out. Obviously, I can't now, which kind of sucks, but one of the downsides to that is that typically a restaurant meal is going to have more fat in it than something you cook at home. It's just part of what it is, right? That's just how restaurants operate. Not good or bad, it's just one of those things. Takeout, all of those things, fast food, very, very fat heavy. And when we look at some of these guidelines here, looking at 30% or less of your total calories being fats, period, 10% or less of saturated fats, and we'll talk about that here just in a minute as to why this may or may not be super true. And then cholesterol here, a lot less than you might imagine. We would certainly like you to have less than 300 milligrams a day, which is really not very much. And your goal ultimately, in terms of the cholesterol in your blood, we would like to see that under 200 milligrams per deciliter. So again, not hard and fast rules here, but pretty good guidelines. What we find, however, is that the typical American diet ends up with way more than this, about somewhere north of 40% being fat, right? So again, we take that to the numbers we looked at before, 45%, 46%, something like that for carbs, 40% fat, okay? We're not leaving much room for proteins, and we are physically made of protein. So you can kind of see how this is going to be a problem here pretty soon. Now with the saturated fat issue, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about cholesterol metabolism at the end of the chapter. But there is some reason to suggest. So what this comes down to is that previous research seemingly suggested that saturated fats interfere with your body's ability to regulate cholesterol. This may not be as true as we once thought. And instead of being horrible for you, it may simply be not good for you, which is slightly different. I'll link in the description to this video a plain English Harvard Med summary paper that kind of goes over some of what that is for your own interest if you want to read it. But this science here is maybe changing a little bit, maybe not. It's still not a great idea to eat a lot of saturated fats. They're still not good for you, but they may not be horrible. So because Americans, people, I'll just say that, people generally don't like to do things that are hard, like exercise, there's kind of a cottage industry, if you will, of fat substitutes, right? Ways that people can eat less fat instead of just simply eating less fat, and so they can count that as a dietary win. I don't know. And the problem with all of these quote unquote fat substitutes is that yes, they're not fats. They all kind of suck. They're all kind of terrible. And these include all manner of things. So we can whip things. If you get something that's whipped, all that this means is that there's air in the food itself. It's been beaten into it. And sometimes this can be great, right? Ice cream works because it has air whipped into it, right? If you've ever had like a tub of ice cream that's melted and then you've refrozen it and you try to eat it later and it kind of tastes like ass, it's because all the air that was whipped into it is now gone. And it really does change the flavor. And so sometimes we can whip things to kind of add a little bit more flavor into something that's pretty bland otherwise. We can modify things like starches and gums to act kind of as binding agents the way that fats tend to do in foods. We can use whey protein from milk. If you have ever tried to use whey supplements for, say, bodybuilding or anything like that, you're aware that whey kind of tastes like crap. It's not delicious in any way, shape, or form. And so the use of it here really doesn't help flavor, generally speaking. And then about maybe 20 years ago, maybe less, I don't know, this product here, Olestra, was supposed to be the saving grace of the food industry, particularly of the shitty potato chip industry. This new fat substitute made from cotton seeds called Olestra. And they put it in all kinds of stuff. And almost immediately after it hit shelves, there's a problem with Olestra and the fact that people were getting, and this was the term that was used, this is not my term, so just if I understand that it's gross, okay, but don't blame me, called anal leakage. Basically, this was a fat, an oil that tasted, I guess, okay, I don't know. This happened before I ever had any of it, and I won't risk anything called anal leakage to try it. But it was non-digestible. It was not something that your body could break down. Okay, and so as a result, it just was this oil all the way through your digestive system, including into your colon, into your rectum, into your anus, and it just kind of slid out the other end. Not really a good trade-off to me personally. Now, apparently they've modified the formula so that it is metabolizable. You can break it down and it doesn't leak out of your butt anymore. I don't know. Again, I'm not willing to try it. But you know, lots of not good options. Generally speaking here, even if they're okay, there's just lots of bad things that come out of this. The worst of these, the absolute worst of these, were the trans fats. And in the 80s, when I grew up, which I realize makes me older than hell, margarine, oleo, these were kind of the big fat substitutes of the day. And what those are those things called trans fats, right? And this is basically a vegetable oil that's good for you, that they converted to a solid form, so you could spread it on toast and stuff. And the idea was that you would have this good for you unsaturated vegetable oil with all the convenience of the saturated fat. Turns out those are like responsible for the vast majority of heart disease in people my age and older, because we ate so much of it. And it turns out that it was extremely bad in terms of not allowing your body to fully process cholesterol. So it built up in your arteries and it kills people. So take home, I guess, on this is that if you want something to have a fat flavor in it, either just cook with vegetable oils, right? Or accept that you're going to use a animal fat, right? Butter is delicious, right? And just don't use bloody much of it, right? Just eat less of it. That's really the only honestly good solution to the whole thing. Okay, third and final major or mega nutrient, I guess, these are proteins. We get these again from both plant and animal sources. The difference between a plant and animal source comes down to what we call a complete protein. Just as there are essential fatty acids, there are essential proteins as well, or essential amino acids as well. And a complete protein contains all of the essential amino acids. Okay. Now, when we talk about animal products, right, we're animals, right? That might be alarming to some of you, but we're animals. We're a part of the natural world. And so when we eat parts of other animals, we're basically eating the same stuff that we're made out of, right? So we don't have to worry about converting it. All of the things are there that we're going to eat. Great. Okay. When we eat plants, plants live in a very different world in terms of their evolution and their structure and all stuff than we do. And so most of the proteins that plants produce might not be the same ones that we need. So we have to convert those into things that we do need. And the end result of that is that a lot of these essential amino acids are missing from most of the major plant groups that we eat. Okay. Now there is one exception to this: soybeans. Soybeans are also containing complete proteins. So if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, you can get your complete protein from soy. If you are not interested in eating soy because you think it tastes gross, or it's really, I guess, the only reason not to eat soy, you need to make sure that you get a combination of different vegetable products so that you get all of your essential amino acids. So if you eat legumes, so beans, okay, and cereal grains together, so wheat, corn, stuff like that. If you eat these things together, you'll get all of the essential amino acids. You just need to make sure that you eat, all of those things. As far as what we do, right, again, we're built out of protein, right? So keratin, collagen, elastin, muscle, things that manufacture essentially all of the physical parts of your body are proteins. We also use proteins for enzymes, right? Some of our hormones are also proteins. If needed, we can convert amino acids into ATP. We prefer not to, right? This is very much a last-ditch scenario, but we can. One of the things that's interesting about how we use amino acids is this notion of this all or none rule. So for carbs, for fats, if we have a process that requires a certain fat or a certain fatty acid or a certain carbohydrate, we don't have it, we just put it on hold. Right? Say, okay, well, we'll just wait till it arrives. Okay. For proteins, when we're building a protein, if we don't have all of the amino acids we need, it doesn't happen. Right? We either have everything we need and we make the protein, or we don't hang on to those amino acids and wait for the last one or two or three that we need. Those amino acids get thrown away, right? They're kicked out of your body. You burn them, you break them down into other parts. You don't hang on to them. So when we talk about getting a diet with your complete proteins in it, this is why that's so very important. Because if you need one of those essential amino acids and you don't have it, then the whole process gets thrown away. Right? You don't hang on for later on. It just is all done. So again, that's a really, really very important part. I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this stuff here. When we talk about nitrogen balance, the reason we talk about nitrogen balance here, remember an amino acid, they're all built on that amine group. It gives it the name, amino, amine, right? And that at heart has a nitrogen at the center of it. So we can kind of use nitrogen and the quantity of nitrogen in your body as a shorthand for amino acids and for proteins, right? So with nitrogen balance, right, we're simply looking at, are you adding nitrogen or are you removing nitrogen from your body? Do you have a positive nitrogen balance, right, where synthesis or the building is occurring, so where you're growing, right? So typically for kids, right, kids that are growing, okay, have a positive nitro balance. Pregnant women who are growing will eventually become another person, right? Maybe, right? I suppose possibilities are numerous here. Positive nitrogen balance, tissue repair. People that have cancer have a positive nitrogen balance. Again, anything that we're adding cells to the body. Negative nitrogen balance is when we're losing those things. So due to injury or poor diet, starvation, any of these sorts of things, where you're breaking down parts of your body faster than you're building, that's a negative nitrogen balance. As far as hormonal controls go here, in terms of the production of new proteins, things like anabolic hormones, so like you think about anabolic steroids, right? Anabolic hormones, which are steroids. So things like growth hormone or sex hormones, particularly testosterone, but estrogens as well, tend to accelerate protein growth. So these will be things that are related to a positive nitrogen balance, okay, anabolic hormones. Whereas glucocorticoids, right, things that are released during times of stress, we talked about those back in the endocrine system, these are going to be things that relate to a negative nitrogen balance, right? When we're breaking proteins down, we're breaking amino acids down, we're losing structure, right? Mostly here because we're in glucose starvation. Now, just to kind of give you a sense for what we're talking about here with our essential amino acids, in the average adult, right, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these essential amino acids, okay? Tryptophan, methionine, valine, threonine, phenylalanine, leucine, isoleucine, and lysine. And you'll get all of these from soy, you'll get all of these from animal products. When you are freshly hatched, there are 2 additional ones that you can't make yet, histidine and arginine. Once you hit toddlerage, okay, you are capable of manufacturing these last 2 on your own. You don't need to ingest them. But in your infancy, you do need them. If you're going to, again, go back to living on a vegetarian or vegan diet, right, your corn, your grains, your cereal grains have some of these, but not all of them, right? They lack isoleucine and lysine. Beans lack tryptophan and methionine. So if you want to have all of these things, and you do, you need to make sure you're eating both of them. Dietary requirements here are pretty different. They're pretty wildly different, honestly. Depending on how big you are, what you're doing with your life, okay? Your average daily intake, somewhere around 0.8 grams per kilogram of body mass. That should say mass, kilograms of mass. Good rule of thumb, but again, you know, if you're concerned about it, talk to your GP, talk to a dietitian. You know, generally speaking, though, your diet still can provide more than you're going to need. Now, whether those proteins are complete, whether those proteins are sufficient in terms of what you're trying to do with them, that's another question. But again, if you're worried about it, that's really a one-on-one with a dietitian kind of question. The last parts here, and I realize this one has gone on longer than normal, but really haven't found a good breaking point yet. The last 2 sort of classes of nutrients here are going to fall in this sort of the other nutrient bin. These will be vitamins and minerals. The big difference between vitamins and minerals is what their source is. Okay, so vitamins are things that are produced by living things, right? We get them from plants and animals, right? Minerals, on the other hand, are inorganic. We get them from eating, we get them from eating plants and animals, but the ultimate source is from the ground, literally from the ground, from soils, from rocks, things like that. Typically, when we talk about vitamins, they are going to be kind of serving in a support role, right? They help your body use the various other nutrients that we bring in, typically here as coenzymes, right? As things that are going to help processes move along. Vitamins D, B, and K are made in your colon, okay? So your bacterial flora, your gut flora manufacture those. Your body makes vitamin A from beta carotene, okay? But aside from D, B, and K and A here, everything else must come from your diet. And one of the reasons that if you look at your little dietary recommendations, right? I remember it wasn't that long ago, they revised those under Michelle Obama, I think was part of the change in revising some of these guidelines. But the reason behind that, in part at least, is because you have to eat a little bit of everything to get all the vitamins that you want, right? You can't simply just take a multivitamin and call it good for reasons that we'll get to in a second. One of the reasons that becomes important here is that they come basically in two varieties, either water-soluble vitamins or fat-soluble vitamins. And for different reasons in both cases, we don't store them. Okay, we kind of use them as we need it. So your water-soluble ones, this would be your B complex vitamins. So anything that starts with a B, okay, anything that starts with a C are these water-soluble vitamins. And again, here, they're not stored. So anything that you don't use within about 60 minutes of bringing it in, you pee out. So a mega dose of any of these water-soluble vitamins is absolutely, totally useless to you. So when you have your Flintstone chewable in the morning, right, anything in there that's water-soluble that you don't use within that hour goes out the next time you go to the bathroom. Okay. The same thing here with emergency, right? You have a cold, you take your emergency, right? You drink it or whatever. It's not really doing anything for you. Sad to say. I mean, it might make you feel good. I drink it because it makes me feel good when I have a cold, right? You have a cold sucks. Anything that helps is wonderful. But that vitamin C really isn't doing anything for you. Okay. There's no value in it. Vitamin company totally selling you on a lie there. Just is what it is, I guess. The other variety here, the fat-soluble ones, these are A, D, E, and K, so the other vitamins. And you do store these in your body, except for vitamin K. But here's the problem with mega doses of A, D, E, well, A, D, and E, is that when you have excess of them, they tend to cause problems in your body. It's not good to have excess of any of these things, right? And so again, your body wasn't built around taking a multivitamin, having a mega dose of this stuff, right? So the body is built around having a good diet. So really, if you want vitamins, that's the healthiest way to do it, the sanest way to do it, certainly probably also the cheapest way to do it. As for what we use them for, a lot of them, particularly C, E, and A, and also a mineral we'll talk about in the next part here, selenium, they serve as antioxidants. And you'll see the term antioxidant thrown around. You'll see the term free radical thrown around. Nobody ever explains what they are. I just, oh, free radicals bad, antioxidants good. Yes, okay, but what are they? So when your body turns glucose into ATP, if it does so using aerobic metabolism, right? So oxygen in the mitochondria, all that good stuff. Part of what it does is it converts that oxygen, it slaps a bunch of hydrogens on it. So it splits the O2 into O and O, so we can have H2O and H2O, right? Or carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide, whatever. Well, sometimes in the process of splitting that oxygen, that O2, so we can stick it on different things, one of those oxygens doesn't join up with anything. And a single oxygen atom is needy, right? It's the ex-boyfriend or girlfriend who's texting you constantly, all the time, right? It's needy, 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 needy. And because it's so needy, it will bond to the first thing that it comes into contact with. The problem with this is that the first thing it comes into contact with is oftentimes your DNA, okay? And whenever anything binds to your DNA, it changes the function of your DNA, right? Sometimes it can turn a gene on or turn a gene off or whatever, but in the case of a free radical, what it does is it oftentimes will shut off the controls on cell division. And so we get cancers as a result of this. That's all a free radical is. So we use vitamin C, E, and A, and selenium as antioxidants. Basically, they're sacrificial lambs. We throw them out there and say, go bind to that free oxygen. Don't let it stick to our DNA. Right? That's all an antioxidant is, and that's all it does. Now, obviously, it's good, prevents cancer, right? But that's what it does. If you want vitamins A and C, your cruciform vegetables are really your best source of it. These are things: broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. They're actually all the same plant, believe it or not. They're just different parts of the same plant. Pretty wild, I know. But they're great sources of A and C. Obviously, citrus fruits also have C in them as well. Minerals, again, same basic idea, but these are inorganic. Okay, lots and lots of these things. We need lots of them, but really there are 7 that are kind of the most important: calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium. And again, unless we use them in structural things, we use calcium and phosphorus, for example, obviously, in the production of bone and dentin. Unless we're actively using them for something, we often don't usually store them. Because again, just like with vitamins, too much of any of these things is toxic to you. So what are we using them for? We make bone out of them. Obviously, we need iron for oxygen binding. Iodine is the precursor to thyroid hormones. Sodium and chloride help to maintain electrolyte balance in your blood, stuff like that. We typically get these from plants because the minerals themselves are typically absorbed as the plant absorbs them from the soil. Okay, so veggies, legumes in particular, have these things. We also get some of them from meat, particularly things like iron and iodine. Milk provides calcium and phosphorus for us. So again, balanced diet here is really the key to proper mineral balance for us. Okay, so I realize again this one went long, almost the length of a regular lecture, but really this was probably the good first stopping point for that. So, and we'll continue on here. We'll move forward with the next part here in the next